My name is Sam Green. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm the director of 32 Sounds. And 32 Sounds is a film, a performance piece. It's what I call live documentary. It's a movie with live elements. So I narrate on the stage. There's film elements on the screen. And J.D. Samson, a great musician and collaborator of mine, is on stage doing live music. So it's all the elements of a film, but it just happens live. It's a film you can't see on Netflix or YouTube. You have to come to this theater where we're presenting it and buy a ticket and turn off your phone and experience it, and that's it. It's a kind of ephemeral form that I like a lot. So 32 Sounds is a kind of experimental documentary. It's a meditation on sound and uses sound to get at other ideas. And it's a kind of essay that I narrate built around 32 recordings of things. And I've been working on it for a couple of years, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly where it started. I don't have some story like I was walking down the street and I heard a siren and that started it. But almost all the films I make come out of the previous film I made. So the last film I made was about the Kronos Quartet, and it was a live cinema piece, and we did the same thing. We workshopped it here at Mass MoCA, and it was a portrait of the Kronos Quartet, this very legendary classical ensemble, and they are on stage performing the soundtrack. In that film, I really thought a lot about how people listen. It's tricky. Most of the time when people see a film, they listen in a very lazy manner. You just kind of let the sound wash over you, and you don't lean in very often. And so I wanted to make a film where people actually heard it in a more engaged way, and then you would experience the music differently. There's a universe of subtlety and hearing and listening and sound, and I'd never thought a lot about it as a filmmaker because film is primarily a visual medium. So I started to really think about sound and listening, and the piece kind of came out of that, I think. An early sort of conceptual challenge with 32 Sounds was, how do you tour around with a piece about sound and present it in all kinds of theaters, some of which have terrible sound systems? Like movie theaters, some of them are fantastic. They have these Atmos, very fancy sound systems. Some movie theaters are awful. It's just like a big speaker there and a big speaker there. So I couldn't figure out how we could do this. And at the same time, I mentioned in the film, I saw a Broadway play called The Encounter about 7 years ago, I think, and that used binaural sound, and everybody wore headphones. I'd never experienced spatial sound before, but it was incredibly striking. I knew that I wanted to use that kind of technology in this film, and the big challenge is it doesn't really work on speakers. So at some point somebody suggested, why don't you use headphones? And I thought, that's a great idea, but it was important not just to have a piece where people put on the headphones at the beginning and then take them off. In a way, I wanted people to pay more attention to that, to the sound than that. And when you take them off, then you become much more aware of the sound in the room and how you're hearing things. So in a way, the whole piece is designed to just sensitize people to the experience of sound and their experience of listening. So I made a live cinema piece for the Whitney Biennial, I think 3 years ago. It was a portrait of a guy named Jim Farrat, who's like a 80-ish New York activist, queer, was at Stonewall, it had this like very fascinating history. A friend of mine sort of curated the screening for the Whitney and knew JD and knew me, and so put us in touch. JD made music for that piece, and it was live, and we had a great time. I love JD's music. One of the things I like about doing live cinema is you can really work with people. In a normal film, you get somebody to do a soundtrack and email things back and forth, and that's kind of it. And this is almost like being in a band together. You travel, you really work on almost a duet sometimes. So that's fun to me. And so in working with musicians, I always like to work with people who are fun to work with. And JD is a super pleasure. So I was excited to ask her if she would do this piece, and she was into it. I feel lucky to be working with JD. Again, it's a film, and we all think of film as images with some sound. How do you make a film that's primarily sonic? And so I had made a short film about Ennea Lockwood, one of the main characters in this film, and I experimented with that, just having a prompt to close your eyes, which is totally weird with a film. Close your eyes in a film, I've never seen that before, but as a kind of intervention in order to get people to do that thing I was mentioning, which is just engage your ears, it seemed like it could be fruitful and in some ways delightful for people to close their eyes in a movie and you're not sure what you're missing, and an odd experience of putting people off balance a little. So I'm never sure if people will actually do it or not, so we'll see. I've done this kind of residency here, workshop at Mass MoCA with this project, and I did the same thing with the last film I made, 1,000 Thoughts About the Kronos Quartet. And in both times it's been profoundly valuable because I sit in my studio back in Brooklyn editing this thing, making it on a computer, but without any of the live element to it. So, it works on a computer as a Vimeo link, but there's a whole dimension of liveness that has to be integrated into the piece, and that changes the piece in a lot of ways. So coming here with the sort of bones of a piece and adding lights and working on staging and timing and all of those things that make something a live performance in the moment that are not part of a film you edit on your computer is huge. That's sort of breathing life into the piece, making it work in a room, and you can't do that. I don't know where else I would ever do this. And so to come and have a theater to work in for a week and to design the lights and to run it, we ran it probably 8 times the whole piece. Each time you learn a lot, and figuring out will people get up and dance? Well, if there's a lot of space on the side, maybe that will work. One of the huge breakthroughs was when I had thought, there's a part in the piece where we talk about really big, low-end sounds, that the subwoofers make. And I'd had this fantasy that we could see that. And at some point we stopped, and with the sound people looked, they were under the stage. I said, could we pull them out? They were like, that's great. We always want to show this stuff. Everybody wants to hide it away. So we pulled out these huge subwoofers and put them in the front. And then people could actually come put their hands on it, which you'd never come up with that idea if you weren't in a space working. So I'm just so thankful to be able to spend time here. There are a million ways to make a film about sound. Literally, there's millions of different versions of that film. And at some point I'd thought, well, the film will just be 32 sounds I think are interesting. And when you edit a film, you make many versions of it. And I made an early version of it that was just that. And after a while, it just kind of fell apart. It's like, okay, after the 20th interesting sound, you're like, all right, I get it. You sort of work the material and certain themes start to come out, and in a way this film ended up much different than what I thought. It ended up being more personal, and it's not, I always cringe a little like the idea of a personal film, I'm going on my emotional journey, and I don't really work in that idiom, but it is a personal film and it uses things that are meaningful to me, and I don't really know, it's so early, I've just finished a film, I don't know how it feels, I don't know how it works with an audience so much, and I hope as a filmmaker, myself at least, I sort of one of my great fears is to make something that's like self-pitying or narcissistic, or, there's so many ways you can go wrong with a personal film. And so it's trying to use bits and pieces of my own life and my own work to make something that holds together and has some meaning and hits on deeper themes about sound as a way to understand time and time passing and loss and ephemerality, all these themes that I really like and tend to work with. So I don't know, that's sort of like how it became in some ways a personal film that uses scenes from other films I've made over the years. So we did this workshop and kind of a premiere here, but the premiere where people think it's going to premiere is at the Sundance Film Festival next month. So I'm really, working to do that, and then, it'll be done, and we are showing it after that at NYU Abu Dhabi, Stanford, and then BAM. We're doing a bunch of shows at BAM in New York, and then in the fall we'll start to really tour around to the Wexner Center and a lot of other shows. And I have made many traditional films, and in the traditional film world you show something for a couple months or a year, and then the film's over and there's new films. And one of the things I really like about the work I've been doing with live cinema is it's more in the performing arts world. That world, things go on and on and on. So the film I made with Kronos Quartet 4 years ago, I'm still doing shows of that. And this 32 Sounds hopefully will be something I'll show for many years after. So I'm excited about it. To me, it's always really fun to go out and travel around and do shows and travel with musicians that I like. And so anyway.